welcome back to Baking with a Purpose. I'm Jamie, and today we're going to be talking about education and how that relates to reproductive health. So, as most people know, sex ed is something that is very rarely taught well in schools. Most of us have an experience where we remember being in health class and covering the basics, maybe getting even a little bit deeper into different topics about reproductive health, but very rarely can people say that their education was completely comprehensive. And many people are advocates of completely comprehensive sex ed, sexual health education, actually, which is defined by Advocates for Youth, which is a foundation, as information about puberty and reproduction, abstinence, contraception and condoms, relationships, sexual violence prevention, body image, gender identity, and sexual orientation. And it's mostly taught, and for it to be comprehensive, it would need to be taught in a psychologically and biologically correct way. So most people I know, including myself, we've had only a few of these bases covered, and the laws of the states differ, and especially depending on the kind of school. Like, I went to Catholic school, so the rules for what we covered and the guidelines were a little bit different, but I would say definitely more on the liberal side for Catholic schools, at least. But everybody's different, everybody's experience is different. But only some of these topics were covered, and the rest came from other teachers that weren't health teachers, friends, family, other, like, I don't know, maybe coaches, like different leaders. Like, we very rarely can say that we learned everything we needed to know from our high school or elementary school health class. But it's really important that kids start having these conversations young, so that when they grow up and they start to become teenagers and they're faced with different situations that can impact their health in a really major way, they're turning to their own tool belt and the resources that they have and to trusted adults so that they can make safe and healthy choices, as opposed to going in uninformed and doing something that can cause serious damage in their lives. And statistics back up comprehensive sexual health education as well. The National Survey of Family Growth, they have conducted a survey on sexual risk-taking for people aged 15 to 19, so pretty much like the middle of adolescence, and saw that teens who experienced a comprehensive sexual education, like the one I outlined earlier, were 50% less likely to have a pregnancy, either they themselves or their partner, than people who only got sex ed from the abstinence only before marriage viewpoint, which is extremely common in America. And they also found out that taking average household income and average education levels into account, states that teach about contraception and HIV education and different ways to minimize risk have the lowest pregnancy rates of other states, which is pretty astounding. And most Americans actually don't support abstinence-based curriculum, and there's a few reasons for that. It shows sexual intercourse as something that's purely heterosexual and should be saved for a heterosexual marriage, and that's framed as like the right choice, so it leaves out people in the LGBTQ community who may not be looking to that kind of marriage as their aspiration, or it leaves out people that maybe don't want to get married at all. It only mentions or puts a heavy emphasis on the failure rates of contraception. It doesn't say, like, you know, IUDs, for example, are like I think it's over 98% effective. I'll put the statistic in the description box below. But they don't say that, because if you know that as a teenager, then you'll probably want to engage in that kind of behavior, and that's not what they want. It also contains a lot of false information, and some of the people I interviewed will touch on that. If you are somebody who's just growing up learning how their body works, and if somebody that is in charge tells you a lie about it, you're obviously going to believe it unless you know better. And it's very obviously misleading, as you can imagine. And finally, it shames teenagers for choosing what they want to do with their bodies, especially girls, because they're shown like they are the schools or the teachers or whoever is teaching this. They can come at it from a view of they want girls to be like pure and save themselves. And it also depicts boys as sexually aggressive, which is obviously not the case. Like, some are, but some women are too, and some like non-binary people are, but most aren't. So it's really unfair to depict them as the aggressors and women as the people who need to like keep themselves safe. So take Oregon, for example, where I am right now. We have one of the best sexual health curriculums in the US that is mandated by the state. It's called the Human Sexuality Education Law. It's very detailed, but overall there are a few different points that I really want to highlight. One is that abstinence should be stressed as the only way to prevent 100% against HIV and STIs and also pregnancy. But they say, and quote, it should not devalue or ignore students who have already engaged in intercourse or sexual contact, which I think is great. It also must be comprehensive, medically accurate, and discuss responsible and safe sexual practices instead of completely saying, don't do it. They're saying if you're going to do it, like, we wish you wouldn't, but if you're going to, here's how you're going to want to do it to keep yourself and your partner safe. We are not the state with the lowest rate of teen pregnancy, but as of 2017, we had between 14.2 and 16.2 births per 1,000 females aged 15 to 19, which is pretty low. And it can be, I'm not sure about the data for like 2019, 2020, but it seems like the trend is going down. And it does sound high, like 16 out of 1,000, but if you compare it to states like Alabama, Arkansas, and Mississippi, their rates, all three of them, are between 26.6 and 32.8 out of 1,000, which is huge and can cause really major problems. So I think we're doing pretty well. And as some of my interviewees mentioned, even if you weren't lucky enough to get a comprehensive sex education like many people, it's not too late to educate yourself. And it's never bad to want to know more information. And like, as one of the women I interviewed mentioned, it's really important to make yourself be informed and then to pass that information along to people who may be in your shoes and were not as informed as they would like to be. So as we can see, there's still a lot of work to be done, but raising awareness is a really great step to being more informed, and as well as like looking up articles, talking to people, watching videos with different facts. It's a really great step. So to raise awareness, I'm going to be frosting a message that kind of encompasses this message in all the interviews that I did on chocolate cake with Oreo frosting, which I'm really excited about. So if you want to see the final product and you want to hear some real women talk about their experiences with education and how that relates to reproductive health, then stick around and we'll see how this goes. I have washed my hands, I've put on my apron, and I'm ready to get started. So if you want to follow along baking with me, I have linked the cake and the recipe in the description box below. And yeah, so here's what you're gonna need to make this cake. A cup of all-purpose flour, half a cup of cocoa powder, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, half a teaspoon of baking powder, and half a teaspoon of baking soda, 1 cup of granulated sugar, 1 egg, 1 cup of buttermilk. I will link in the description the same recipe that I used in episode 2 talking about how to make your own buttermilk. And it's pretty easy, but if you don't have buttermilk at home, it's a pretty simple way to substitute. A 1/4 cup of unsalted butter, which is about half a stick. 1/3 cup of oil. I use vegetable oil, but you can use canola if you want. And 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. As I said in my other chocolate cake video, I always add a little bit extra vanilla to my chocolate recipes because I think it helps bring out the chocolate flavor a little more. So I did about a teaspoon and a quarter or a teaspoon and a half, somewhere between that, but you can follow the recipe if you'd like.
Lot like sex ed should start younger. It should be more comprehensive. Like it should be more inclusive. It should be available everywhere. Like it just like could get so much better. In America, just the way it looks at sex is so backwards. I think. Um, yeah, like I feel like just everything could improve. Honestly.
I also am very much pro sex. And, people often talk about the three pillars of health, which are, exercise, sleep, and diet. And I certainly preach those to everybody. But I actually would throw a fourth pillar in, which is healthful sexuality. And I think a fully grown adult is really most healthy if they have some sort of sexual practice. Now, I'm sort of that can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people, but I think if people don't have access to good reproductive health, they have can't always have the sexual practice that might fulfill them the most.
So my mom is from Trinidad in the Caribbean, and um, she did not have that at all. Like they weren't not taught about bodies at all, and like I grew up like going to the Caribbean and like in the United States, and like when I would go to school with my cousins, we were just like told lies all the time, like about our bodies. And so like I don't know, there's um yeah, there's like a sense of gratitude for like at least being told the truth.
How do you think society can like better empower people to be more proactive about their reproductive health?
um I think like obviously education, but I don't think that things are like specific enough,
Right.
like like people don't, I don't know, like I don't know like the answer or whatever, but it's just not there. I mean, it's been a long time since I was in like a health class or whatever, but
Right.
we never really, there was just like still a lot of taboo.
Okay, so the cakes are out. We're gonna wait for them to cool, and in the meantime, we're gonna make the frosting. So I've also linked this recipe in the description below. So you can follow along with this, and then I'm gonna start decorating, and then we'll talk a little bit about the message. Another note for the frosting is the recipe that I'm gonna be using is generally for a couple of dozen cupcakes or for an 8-inch cake. And since we're gonna be doing a 6-inch cake, I like to have freedom to make kind of a lot of frosting and have some left over. But if you're making a 6-inch cake like I am, then you can go ahead and reduce the amount of ingredients down and just kind of eyeball it or like reduce it. But I'm just gonna go ahead and make the standard amount because I'd like a little bit more frosting than most. So here's what you're gonna need for the frosting: 2 sticks of butter, which is a cup, and I used unsalted even though the recipe calls for salted, and I added some salt into the powdered sugar. 10 Oreos, you're going to want to crush them up pretty roughly because you want to have big pieces in your frosting. If you want the crumbs to be a little bit finer, then you can go over with a rolling pin, but I just crushed them with my hand. The recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of vanilla, but I used about a teaspoon and a quarter because a lot of the frosting from the Oreos got stuck on the bag that I was using to crush. 3 cups of powdered sugar.
Really talked to them about it yet. Like we talk about, we're really big on like bodily autonomy and like consent, and that's mainly where our conversations are at the moment about like you don't touch people that don't want to be touched, and like what, like you can't tell people what to do with their bodies. Like my 4-year-old, he'll be like, well, I just want to hug her, and I'm like, well, she doesn't want to hug, and you have to both want to hug for it to be okay. But so we haven't really talked about it yet. But I mean, my plan is just to be frank and open and honest about everything, because it's just healthcare. It's just part of life, you know. But since I'm always down for this kind of thing, because that's what we have to do, is like get our stories out there. That's really the only thing.
I mean, I'm a 90s kid, you know what I mean? And grew up with a single dad. Um, and yeah, he never had to talk with us. He never, you know, did any of that with me and my twin sister, who he raised as a single father. So that had a lot to do with the denial of having unprotected sex when I was a young teenager. But then after I had my son, me and 2 very close girlfriends all had our first and only children within 6 months of each other, and none of us have gone on to have any other children. So, you know, definitely took a lot more interest in that post motherhood.
Right. And then like also with your son, like has the way that you view it, like proactive reproductive health, changed since like when it comes time to like explain to him?
Definitely, yeah. We have had a much more open dialogue about sex and reproductive health than I ever had with my parents growing up. He's always had, you know, access to condoms if he needs those. He is a sexually active teenager, and I'm glad that he trusted me enough to tell me that he was. And that way, you know, if he has weird questions, I can be there to answer those for him and just make sure that he is well supplied with what he can do as a man to take care of reproductive health in a relationship. And I think that the best way to do that would be for women to, you know, to talk to their friends. You know, it's easy for one enlightened person who's serious about education, you know, to take that information and then disseminate that to her close loved ones, especially in the communities, like I was saying before, that where the women may not be educated enough on that. You know, if you can't go into a community like that and be like, here's pamphlets, here's condoms, use them, you know.
In terms of
I can't really think of anything. I mean, along with the reproductive health, you know, that's the first step, but then support for, you know, single mothers who may not have had access to that education and find themselves, you know, pregnant without, and it was an accidental pregnancy. That's exactly what happened.
So now that the frosting is ready, we're going to start decorating. And we are going to frost the message, educate yourself, on this cake. So the reason I chose this is because the way that the sexual health education system is right now, there's not a lot that can be done in terms of like, if you're in high school right now, it's really hard to try to get your like teachers to start teaching better, because a lot of the times the rules on what can be taught are from the government. And so we'll touch on that a little bit in the next episode. But one thing you can do if you didn't get the kind of education that you really think would be useful, the best thing you can do is educate yourself. Find good sources. Find like the National Institute of Health. Find like the CDC. Find Planned Parenthood. Find some reputable source that you can find reliable, quality information. It shouldn't be on us to educate ourselves about how to be responsible, sexually active adults, or how to be empowered in your health, how to advocate for yourself the best. But unfortunately, the situation right now is that we do have to take these things into our own hands. So the best thing you can do for yourself is do some research, learn about your body, learn about the situation surrounding reproductive health, tell your friends, tell people, raise awareness, and yeah, educate yourself. And there you have it. This is our final product of the chocolate cake with royal frosting and our little message on the top. There we go. All right, so we are all done. And thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope you learned something because I did. And in the next episode, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the role that government plays in reproductive health. And I've talked about this in almost every video, I think. But I really want to focus on this because this is something that almost every single one, if not all, of my interviewees brought up. And so I think this is a great way to end this series. And it's just really important that people know what they can do for themselves and how to empower their leaders to make good, responsible choices surrounding reproductive health. So be sure to check out the links in the description box. I've linked the recipes as usual so you can follow along with me. I've linked all the sources that I've used in my videos so you can go back through and look through those. And I've also linked just like general resources, especially because this is the theme of this episode is education. So I really wanted to make sure that there was a bunch of different reliable sources that you can use to educate yourself. So if you have a question, if you have a comment, if you just want to chat, then leave a comment and I'll see you next time. Bye.